Good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to be with you at St. Anne's this morning, at least in this virtual way. I haven't had the opportunity to be with you in person yet, and I so hope that when this latest wave of the pandemic subsides a bit, I can come join you on a Sunday morning or any other time. I am grateful to Howard and Mary for inviting me this morning to talk about social media in a faith-based context. It is such a big part of our lives, social media, and has literally, quite literally, I believe, taken over the world. And that can be a scary thing. So, how do we work with it in the context of ministry? I think it's wonderful that you all have what you call a social media ministry at St. Anne's. That is a critical piece of spreading the good news. I'm Carrie Graves. I'm the Canon for Communications in the Diocese of Maryland. And over the years, here in Maryland and my home diocese of Upper South Carolina, where I also served as Canon for Communications, social media has been a huge part of the important work that we do to spread the good news, to share our ministries, to share our joys and sorrows, and to let the world know about Christ and about the church. So, how do we do that? The mission of the Diocese of Maryland is to encounter Christ everywhere and engage in God's mission of reconciliation in the world. Well, social media being a part of our lives is one way we can engage in God's mission of reconciliation. So in the Diocese of Maryland, we use at the diocesan level most of the major social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, a little bit of Twitter, to get the word out about our shared mission as the diocese, and that includes you, the people of St. Anne's. The mission we do at the diocesan level is a part of all of our congregations, and we can do more working together as one diocese. So we write up stories about what we're doing, and we share those to Facebook. We post sermons on YouTube. We post worship on YouTube. We share fundraising pieces online in order to support those ministries and to help get the word out about the ministries further, even if they don't raise money. Hopefully they do, and sometimes they definitely do. But the word is out there, and it's good news. Some of you might remember that during the pandemic, John Krasinski, most known for being an actor in the series The Office, started a show called The Good News Network. And it lasted for a few months, and people were just overjoyed. He felt that we just needed some good news in the world. And studies have shown that good news and positive reflection on God actually change our brain and are good for our health. So we have a big job to do. When we think about the news media, everything on it just about is negative. I know there's some hopeful stories on morning shows and things like that, but we take events that are critically important in the context of their communities and even in the context of the world and talk about just those negative events that are affecting us. And that's not good for us. We need to be informed and we need to be active and engaged, but we need to have inspiration. So, I once saw a meme early in my work in communications for the church of Bishop Curry, who I understand you are also watching this morning, that has his arms raised in his preaching stance, and it says, "Tweet in church." And I loved it. He is so on the edge of what is new and current and tries to adapt whatever is in our world as a vehicle to proclaim God's good news. And I think we have a responsibility to do that as well. On top of that, we have this pandemic. And so how do we build community online, especially when people are isolated, but also amidst our busy lives and in the regular world? If the pandemic were to go away tomorrow, we would still need this. So Facebook groups are one way to do that. I'm sure some of you probably participate in some in your daily lives. And we build community by sharing the gospel through sermons and worship, and through Facebook posts, good news stories, stories about the ministries in our churches. We also use social media to shout from the mountaintop, things like the biblical mandate to do justice. Once we had a letter from Bishop Sutton and other faith leaders in Baltimore that was written to political leadership. And I want to clarify for those who may say the church should not be involved in politics, just to let you know where I'm coming from. And that is, the Bible is a series of documents that calls us to do justice. And justice in that context is, no matter who the leadership is, no matter what party, no matter how you feel about them, justice is holding leadership, period, accountable for the fair and equal treatment of all of God's children. And I think that so many of our ministries are aimed at that, such as our current reconciliation and reparations initiatives in the diocese, and so many more. So, social media is a great way to get the word out. Online advocacy tools are incredibly helpful at reaching out to leadership to let them know how we as Episcopalians and Christians think that certain policies would support the values of Jesus in the world. Online courses are another thing that I find on Facebook. In my own spiritual life, I have come across so many classes and book recommendations and things that I wouldn't have seen from friends that I love and trust across the diocese and across the United States, such as some of the people of St. Anne's. I might not see you every day, but if we're connected on Facebook and you've read something that really inspired you, or you found a sermon to be very powerful and you share it, those things get seen. And I can't tell you how much joy that sparks in me. So a little bit about my personal social media experience. There's a lot of talk out there about how negative it is. And we do know that the leadership in the social media companies is corrupt and has ill intentions a lot of the time. So where does that take us as church people ethically and morally? I think it's like any other justice issue. We have an obligation to hold leadership accountable for the fair and equal treatment of all God's people, which means protecting against things that harm. So my hope is that in the years to come, we as the church will advocate and use our own legislative system in the church to pass resolutions to lead us to a shared mission of making social media a safer and better place for the world. But for me personally, I have built so many relationships. I'm a member of some spiritual communities and I do dream work as a spiritual practice. And between in-person events, I've been able to foster those relationships so that the next time I see that person in person, the relationship's a little deeper, a little more connected. And I can't tell you how much joy it's brought me. You may or may not have heard that communicators in the church and others call your website the front door to your church. And if you don't have a good web presence, it's kind of like shutting your front doors and asking people to find their way to a random side door to enter to worship. It's not very welcoming. So with social media, there's a similar concept in place. So instead of social media being the front door to the church, I like to think of it as the windows, the stained glass windows, if you will. I like to think of the different platforms as the windows into your church community, into what you're doing, into the loving environment you can offer others, into the good you are doing in the world. And I like to think of it as a bullhorn shouting from the mountaintop, the good news of Christ, through sermons, through blogs, through devotionals, through anything that anyone can share that would inspire you, bring you comfort, just simply remind you as you're scrolling through that feed that God is with you. Finally, I'd like to say that a few years ago, someone once taught me that Facebook could be a great tool for prayer. And this ties into my own positive personal experience with social media. I really don't engage with things that are negative or don't have a good role in my life. And that's not to say that I'm blinding myself to one side of things. That is to say, I'm taking a stance on what I think a follower of Jesus would do. Speaking out when necessary, speaking the truth in love, but mostly looking for information that provides love, inspires me to follow Christ. So, think about Facebook this way, and Instagram too. Really, any social media. Facebook is perhaps the best example of what I'm about to tell you, which is when you pick up your phone and you're scrolling through your Facebook feed, checking in on people like I do with my congregation back home in South Carolina that I grew up in, seeing their good news, their sorrows, sharing their medical journeys, seeing their grandchildren born, use it as a tool for prayer. When I see one of you go by, I can stop and pause and think of you and pray for you. I also can react and give you a virtual care or hug, which in my world means a lot to people. But I think what's really cool and really important is to stop and use it as a prayer list. One last story I'd like to share with you. In our development department in the Diocese of Maryland, we raise money for 12 ministries yearly through the Bishop's annual appeal. I'm sure some of you have given and have seen it, and you may have seen it on social media. One great example of the social media that was created for that a couple of years ago from the development department was using St. Nicholas Day as a giving day. I mean, what could be more in the spirit of St. Nicholas? Our development team worked hard to do a number of posts about St. Nicholas, about who he was, educating people on a saint in our church and on the origins of Santa Claus, but through a theological lens. The posts featured different ministries within the diocese and approached them through the spirit of giving that is St. Nicholas. So to me, that's a win on many levels. It shows the ministry of the church. It teaches a bit about church history, and it really demonstrates what we're about in the Episcopal Church and in the Diocese of Maryland. Up next for us, hopefully, will be some social media campaigns about reparations and reconciliation to further get the word out there. There's a lot of misunderstanding about those topics, and the more that we can put out for people to see and have some clues as to what's really going on and what's the intention behind this ministry and how it demonstrates our love for our fellow human beings and how it shows we're followers of Christ, can really start to change hearts and minds. So thank you so much for all you're doing. I wish you a beautiful social media journey like I am blessed to have. Just make sure you take the reins and that you engage in ways that you know through discernment and prayer and thoughtfulness, ways that you know are demonstrative of being followers of Christ. Share as much as you can. The old-fashioned now Facebook mode of checking in when you get to a location, such as a restaurant, still works. Check in when you go to church in person, but check in and put the location in when you're watching a service online. Let people know what you're doing. Let people know that what your church means to you. I've seen some wonderful posts in recent months from individuals who have their own personalities out in their communities and are loved and respected by many people, not for church reasons, who then post on social media how great their church is. And probably a lot of their friends would be surprised to know they even went to church. But they take that stance and they make sure that people know what their church is doing, what incredible ministries their church is engaging in, and how enriching that community is for them. So do use social media to communicate, connect, and enrich your own spiritual life. You won't regret it. Thank you again for having me today. I look forward to seeing each and every one of you in person, and I look forward to seeing you on social media.